Hey, and welcome to the highlights of episode number 87 with Akil Palanisamy. Now, some of my favorite parts of this episode were when he gave us his top 6 tips on how to improve our digestion, because we aren't what we eat, we are what we digest. I also love when he gave us the typical dinner plate for the different body types, the importance of spices, and why we need to take a holistic mind, body, and spirit approach to our health. But there is so much more wisdom and inspiration that you get in the full episode. So, to listen to the full podcast and to get all the information in the show notes, head to melissaambrosini.com/87 right now. Akil, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you here. So, like many healers, you have had to heal yourself, and this led you down the path of Ayurveda. Now, can you tell us about your journey to where you are today?
It started for me when I was in medical school at the University of California, San Francisco. And it was my dream, to study medicine, and I had been preparing for this my whole life. And a couple of years before starting medical school in college, I had become a vegetarian, having gotten really interested in health and deepening my yoga practice and for ethical reasons. So I had become a vegetarian and, felt really good. But then once medical school started and after a year of the stress, I began having severe pain. I developed carpal tunnel syndrome and back pain, as well as severe neck pain, and was no longer able to, write my exams or write my assignments, use the computer. I actually developed continuous chronic pain, 24/7. And it got to the point where I had to stop medical training and take a year off. And I really wasn't sure if I would be able to return because I had seen all of the conventional medical doctors and I had been doing physical therapy, taking anti-inflammatories, all the usual treatments for a couple of years and really was not getting better. And so it was at that point that I really came to question whether my diet was playing a role in my illness. And even though it was a big struggle for me in my family to eat vegetarian, and other people thought that I was making a big mistake, I was very adamant about following the vegetarian diet. But at that point, because I was just at the end of my rope and had to take time off from my medical training, I opened my mind and questioned whether, maybe there was something that I didn't know that could really change my health. And so I went to an Ayurvedic practitioner. And at that time, she was the first person who suggested that I incorporate some animal products into my diet. And she suggested that I have bone broth, actually. And this was about 20 years ago, before bone broth was really a thing like it is now. But Ayurveda actually uses bone broth extensively for gut healing. That was the first time that I really noticed an improvement in my health, just like a 10% change, but that was really from bone broth and having the dietary changes. And then gradually I began to experiment with having more animal products and meat back in my diet, and really felt that it was transformative in terms of getting me back my energy, reducing pain. It was only later when I trained in Ayurveda that I understood that for certain body types, some animal protein is necessary, and I'm one of those body types.
What are some things that we can do today to really improve our digestion?
Having a very healthy Agni, or the digestive fire, is really the foundation. And I think there's some very basic things that people can do in terms of having a strong Agni. One is first thing upon waking in the morning to have a glass of warm water with lemon, and also a little bit of honey as well is fine. And that's a great way to start the day. Also, throughout the day, avoiding iced water is very important. So in Ayurveda, temperature of the food and water should be warm most of the time. So it's very common to have sodas and drinks with ice, but that's a no-no in Ayurveda. So just avoiding iced water and having either warm or room temperature water. throughout the day is very important. And a big part of Ayurveda also is the use of spices. So in my book, I talk about 13 spices that are really crucial. I call them the kitchen pharmacy, because spices are really a part of medicine in Ayurveda. They're considered to be therapies. Everyone has heard of turmeric, and and rightly so, because it's an amazing spice. But there's so many others, that are incredible, like ginger, cumin, fennel, black cumin, fenugreek, cinnamon, etc. So I think incorporating spices is really a great way to keep the Agni and digestive fire strong. Since I'm also a functional medicine doctor, I've seen some things that help the microbiome or the gut bacteria, also really help with the Agni. And that is to have fermented foods on most days because of their good bacteria, and then having plenty of prebiotic foods as well. So the fermented foods have the probiotics, and then the prebiotic foods have the food for the gut bacteria. So that's very important as well.
Can you tell us why spices are so important and what are your top 13?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. There's 4 reasons that spices are so important for, today's world. And they are the antioxidant component, the anti-inflammatory aspect, blood sugar regulation, and digestive enhancement. And so we can start with the antioxidant aspect, and that is relating to oxidative stress, which is basically the strain on our body from everything like, our metabolism, and also pollution, toxins, radiation. These are things which are unavoidable. And so oxidative stress is kind of the norm for our modern world. And that's why antioxidants are so important. And for example, turmeric and ginger and pretty much every spice, when they've tested them, has found to be rich in antioxidants, and usually a variety of different antioxidants as well. So the second thing was the anti-inflammatory effect. And I think chronic inflammation is the other kind of modern bane of our existence. And spices work on really a broad array of inflammatory genes to downregulate them, like NF-kappa B, nuclear factor kappa B is one of the most well-studied that is an anti-inflammatory gene, and many spices block the activation of that. And so I think their effect on reducing inflammation is also very potent. And then multiple spices really help with blood sugar. Diabetes is spiraling out of control all over the world. And there are many people with prediabetes and impaired blood sugar regulation who don't even know it. In fact, most of them don't know it. So spices really help with maintaining healthy blood sugar. And there's a lot of research evidence now to support that. So I think it's ideal to prevent the development of diabetes. Just like in any situation, Ayurveda believes prevention is better than treating the. So spices can help with, the blood sugar aspect. And then finally, Ayurveda believes that all disease starts in the gut. And so that Agni or digestive fire is really the crucial thing. And so spices can be a really powerful tool that helps with keeping that Agni strong and, helping your digestion to run well and preventing all illnesses, as a result of that.
Now, what's your view on grains? Because for some body types, they thrive on them, but for others, they don't. So what's your take on this?
It's a complex topic. And, because Ayurveda really believes in customizing things, I don't think we can say that all grains are bad for everybody. Because we all know that there are people who eat grains and seem to thrive on them and seem to do fairly well, tolerating them. I think that with wheat and gluten, that's where, in terms of grains, more people have an issue, because the wheat that we have in our world today is very different from the wheat that was 100 years ago, that our grandparents ate. It's genetically been modified. The number of chromosomes is different. It's much higher in starch. It's much higher in gluten, lower in other nutrients as well. And also, I think there's an interaction with the microbiome. So we need to have a very healthy microbiome to consume grains, and especially wheat. And so there's a lot of things that have to be going right for people to eat grains. And, if all those things are going well, like they're having a healthy microbiome, they don't have blood sugar issues or prediabetes, they don't have sensitivities to grains, and they're generally feeling well, then I think and also they're physically active, I think they can incorporate grains.
And you also have a recipe called the super spiced morning smoothie. Now, why do you think that is the best way to start the day?
We all could benefit from having more fruits and vegetables in our diet, and a smoothie is just a convenient way to boost the number and supercharge your morning breakfast with that. But I don't think it necessarily has to be the only thing you're eating in the morning. Like, for example, you might have eggs and some nuts and a smoothie as well. Like I did today. But there's some purists in Ayurveda who would say that a smoothie should not be consumed because it's cold and it's processed. You're not getting the full experience of eating, and that's where I'm not a strict purist in terms of Ayurveda, because I can see where they're coming from, but I also think that we're all busy, we all have very full lives, and sometimes these shortcuts like making a smoothie can be really beneficial, as long as you're using all those right ingredients. Plus, finally, I think getting spices, it's really a matter of cumulative lifetime dose. So, like for example, with turmeric, the reason why India has such a low rate of Alzheimer's is probably the amount of turmeric they consume over their whole life. And so, if you can just figure out ways to get it into your meals every day, I think you may not like to have Indian food every day, but if you have turmeric and black pepper in your smoothie, that'll be a great way to get that dose of turmeric for the day.
But another ingredient that we use a lot of in our house is ghee, and I know you are the same. So can you tell us how and why this has been used for thousands of years in Ayurveda and why it's so important?
Yeah, ghee is one of my favorite subjects. In Ayurveda, it's considered to be a tonic for the digestive tract. It's excellent for the Agni. It's excellent for the brain as well, considered to be a brain tonic. And, our brain is mostly fat. And Ayurveda also believes in this concept of ojas, or vitality, which is like your cellular reserves. And ghee is one of the best foods for building up the ojas, building up the vitality. It's believed to help with detoxification. It's quite easy to make ghee. If you don't have it in your stores, you can just get some butter and melt it. And in the book, I talk about exactly how to do it, but simply put it, you're just melting butter slowly, and over about half an hour, and then you'll be filtering it after that, and just keeping the clear liquid, in a glass jar. I think ghee, has all of those health, benefits. It's a good fat, and then also it's very rich in certain vitamins, from the nutritional perspective. So very high in vitamin A. Vitamin K2, which is the important nutrient for bone health. It also has CLA, or conjugated linolenic acid, which is a very beneficial fatty acid. If the ghee comes from grass-fed butter, it'll have omega-3s and some vitamin D as well.
What are your thoughts on vegan diets and consuming animal protein?
That's a great question. And, I have no opposition to that. I think that works very well for certain people, and in Ayurveda, the vata body type is the one that has a higher need for animal protein, but people that have more of a pitta or fire, or the kapha or earth body types are generally, they can be okay on a vegan or plant-based diet.
So I would love to hear now, in your opinion, what does the average dinner plate look like for the different body types? So what would an average dinner plate look like for a vata, and then for a pitta, and then for a kapha?
Yeah, vatas are the most active, and can also be a bit restless. So they are the ones who need the biggest in terms of quantity. So they should have the biggest plates, and they should have probably more carbohydrates as well. And of course, keep in mind, these are all generalizations, but just to illustrate. So for example, vata dinner plate might have a couple of servings of either rice or quinoa or sweet potatoes. And in Ayurveda, a serving for when you're talking about most grains is considered to be a handful of food. So and each person has a different sized hand, so that way you can sort of estimate in terms of how much you should be eating. And so Yeah, so definitely having healthy amount of good carbohydrates. And then vata person should avoid salads. So should avoid raw, vegetables generally. So for them, it's better to have cooked vegetables. And, that should be probably half the plate, cooked vegetables, also with some spices and oil because vata has dryness and coldness. So they need plenty of spice, they need plenty of oil, or ghee. I tend to just pile a bunch of ghee and oil on my, on my plates usually. And then finally, because they also need more protein, I think having some side of protein, whether that's, chicken or fish, or if they're vegetarian, tofu or beans, something like that is important as well. So I recommend for vata people always having plenty of protein and fat with every meal because that helps them with their, high metabolism, their high activity level, and that sort of thing. So moving on to pitta person. So in general, their need for protein is much lower and more moderate. So their plate should still be half vegetables, and they can do well with raw vegetables depending on the person. So they might do a salad or cooked vegetables. And then pitta people tend to do, really well with legumes as well. So really encourage them to have beans, or lentils if they tolerate them, just making sure that they're properly soaked and, prepared to take care of lectins or other anti-nutrients. As long as they're properly prepared, I think many people can benefit from all the nutritional qualities of beans. And then pitta person. So again, we're talking about 2 handfuls of vegetables, either salad or cooked vegetables. And then the protein serving should be the size of their palm. So a smaller palm-sized serving of, again, either animal protein if they want, or vegetarian, protein. And the very best fat for pitta is ghee because it does have a cooling element. So they're recommended to have ghee. But for pitta, they should not have too much spice. So unlike vata, where they really need the spice, to warm them up, pitta people have a lot of heat, but they love spicy food typically. So that's always the challenge is getting them to back off on the spice, or if they really must have some spice, the cooling spices in Ayurveda are cumin, coriander, and fennel. So pitta people really want spice in their food. They should use cumin, coriander, and fennel, and of course turmeric, and try to avoid like the chili or the the excessive other spices. And then finally, the kapha dinner plate would be so kapha is the type that generally has the slowest digestion. They're the slowest in terms of metabolism, so they should also be eating the least in terms of quantity. So still with half the plate being vegetables, they have the option to do either raw or cooked vegetables. Yeah, and kapha often they don't necessarily need to have that the protein aspect. They have the lowest need for protein of all the 3 body types. They tend to love dairy typically, just stereotyping. So if they do want to have maybe a little bit of cheese or dairy, as a side, that would actually give them probably enough protein, and then they can have the rest of the plate with either legumes or beans or animal protein if they really want. But seriously speaking, for kapha body types, intermittent fasting is something that's really highly recommended in Ayurveda, and in general having the lightest portions and the least amount of food compared to the other 2 body types.
Now, I'd love to hear, though, what role does food combining play in the Paleovedic diet?
I'll first talk about what I think works best in terms of what I've seen with my patients. And that is that, the studies have shown that when you combine carbohydrates, protein, and fat at each meal, that actually the blood sugar tends to rise more slowly. And that's why when they look at people with diabetes, when they're having more balanced meals, if they're having just carbohydrates, it tends to spike their blood sugar. But if they have protein and fat along with the carbohydrates, then it's a more even rise in terms of blood sugar. So I found that, in the beginning, I was very gung-ho about Ayurvedic food combining rules with my patients. And so, for example, and there's a lot of things that are not compatible. Like, for example, if you're having fruit, you should never have grains with that, and fruit should only be had by itself, and like dairy, like cheese doesn't combine well with with fruit, and it can get very overwhelming. Ayurveda believes in scraping the tongue. It's not for hygiene or cleanliness, but actually the tongue is a microcosm of the entire body. And scraping the tongue with a metal tongue scraper, from the back to the front, stimulates all the organs and also stimulates the digestive fire. And in Ayurveda, there's 7 tissue layers in the body. And so you're told to scrape the tongue 7 times for each tissue layer. And so, I do that when kind of in the morning starting the day.